Welcome, everyone! Today's episode dives into one of the most explosive and troubling narratives in recent memory. What really happened behind the scenes of It Ends With Us. This is not a story about a film. It's about power, manipulation, and the courage it takes to stand up against an entrenched system. At the center of this storm is Blake Lively, a seasoned actress, a mother, and a professional who found herself battling more than just the challenges of her role. Behind her poised exterior lies a harrowing story of harassment, retaliation, and systemic failures. Her opponents? A well oiled machine led by Justin Baldoni, Jamey Heath, and their PR operatives. A team determined to silence her voice and protect their own interests. In this episode, we'll take you through the detailed revelations from an 80-page document that exposes how misconduct and manipulation ran rampant on the set. From unwanted physical advances to a meticulously crafted smear campaign, this story isn't just about one person's struggle. It's about the culture of silence and complicity that Hollywood still grapples with today. But it's not all darkness. Blake Lively's bravery in confronting these issues head on has sparked critical conversations about workplace safety, accountability, and respect. Her fight isn't just for herself. It's for the countless voices who have been silenced in similar situations. So grab a seat, lean in, and join us as we unpack the truth behind the headlines. This is Behind the Curtain, where we challenge the narratives, call out the power dynamics, and celebrate the resilience of those who dare to speak out. On January 4th, 2024, a pivotal meeting was held just before the filming resumed on It Ends With Us. This meeting was not your ordinary production catch-up. It was a critical intervention to address an escalating workplace crisis. With reports of harassment, hostility, and misconduct almost derailing the project, all principal figures gathered. Among them were Justin Baldoni, the film's director and lead actor, Jamey Heath, the CEO of Wayfarer Studios, and Blake Lively, who brought along her representative, her husband, Ryan Reynolds, for support. The stakes were high, and this meeting was set to define whether filming could continue in a safe and professional environment. Blake Lively had been raising concerns for months about troubling behavior on set, particularly the conduct of Baldoni and Heath. These weren't isolated issues. They were recurring patterns of inappropriate behavior, affecting not just Lively, but other female cast and crew members. Despite Lively's persistent efforts to address these matters, Wayfarer Studios continually dismissed her concerns, forcing her to confront the misconduct directly with the perpetrators in attendance. This meeting marked a significant step in Lively's fight for accountability. During the January 4th meeting, a detailed account of the inappropriate conduct was laid bare. This included allegations of Baldoni and Heath showing explicit images and videos, discussing highly personal and inappropriate topics, and disregarding boundaries, both physical and professional. The conversation also highlighted broader issues of workplace safety, including the absence of essential safeguards, like an intimacy coordinator. These revelations were not just about isolated incidents, but a systemic culture of misconduct that had flourished under the leadership of Wayfarer Studios. The meeting concluded with an agreement to implement a series of protections to prevent further harm. These included mandates for the presence of an intimacy coordinator during sensitive scenes, restrictions on physical contact without consent, and comprehensive guidelines for professional behavior. While these measures allowed the production to resume, they also underscored the extent to which basic industry norms and legal protections had been ignored up until that point. Following this agreement, filming resumed on January 5th and concluded on February 9th. While this allowed the project to move forward, it was far from a resolution of the deeper issues. The steps taken were not a reflection of Wayfarer Studios' proactive responsibility, but rather a direct result of Lively's relentless advocacy for herself and others on set. As the film approached its release, an entirely new problem emerged. Despite an agreed-upon marketing plan that emphasized themes of hope and resilience, Justin Baldoni abruptly shifted focus to survivor content. This pivot was not only a deviation from the agreed strategy, but a transparent attempt to redirect attention away from the allegations against him. It was a self serving move that weaponized the very themes the film was meant to celebrate. The retaliation against Blake Lively became more apparent as Baldoni and his team engaged in what the document describes as a social manipulation campaign. This included planting misleading stories, employing astroturfing tactics, and leveraging social media to discredit Lively while bolstering Baldoni's public image. This wasn't just about managing fallout, it was a calculated attempt to silence Lively and harm her reputation irreparably. At the core of this retaliatory campaign was a strategy designed to manipulate public perception. Baldoni and his team, including PR specialist Melissa Nathan and Jennifer Abel, discussed tactics that went beyond traditional damage control. Their methods include creating fake social media accounts to disseminate false narratives, promoting misleading content about Lively, and engaging in astroturfing, a deceptive practice where orchestrated opinions are presented as grassroots movements. These actions were explicitly aimed at tarnishing Lively's reputation while shielding Baldoni and his associates from scrutiny. The document highlights chilling exchanges between Baldoni's team members, where they openly discussed their plans to bury Lively. PR specialists assured Baldoni that they could effectively destroy her credibility, but they also cautioned against documenting these plans too explicitly for fear of legal exposure. Their conversations revealed an unsettling level of confidence in their ability to manipulate public opinion and silence dissent. Adding to the layers of manipulation, Baldoni's team employed subcontractors and digital operatives to create and amplify content that appeared authentic, but was, in fact, carefully engineered. This included seeding favorable narratives about Baldoni and feeding content to unwitting journalists to spread misinformation. By blurring the line between genuine public opinion and orchestrated propaganda, they sought to discredit Lively while presenting Baldoni as a figure of moral authority. The retaliation extended beyond professional harm. It aimed to inflict personal and emotional damage. The document reveals how Baldoni and his associates weaponized public platforms to attack Lively's character, spread falsehoods about her, and create an environment of hostility. These actions were not only unethical, but also deeply damaging to Lively and her family, exposing them to public scrutiny and emotional distress. The retaliatory campaign didn't stop at discrediting Lively. It also sought to erase the misconduct allegations against Baldoni and Heath. By shutting down stories about HR complaints and silencing witnesses, the team ensured that the toxic environment on set would remain hidden from public view. This deliberate suppression of the truth highlights the lengths to which Baldoni and his associates were willing to go to protect their reputations. Even after the film's release, the manipulation continued. Baldoni's PR team bragged about their success in steering the public narrative, noting how social media sentiment had shifted in his favor. They credited these results to their aggressive tactics, which included drowning out critical voices and amplifying positive stories about Baldoni. This calculated effort to dominate the conversation underscores the power dynamics at play, where resources and influence were used to suppress accountability. One of the most egregious aspects of this campaign was its impact on survivors of domestic violence, the very audience the film purported to support. By co-opting their narratives to shield himself, Baldoni not only trivialized their experiences, but also weaponized their stories for his own gain. This exploitation of survivor content reveals a profound disregard for the people whose stories the film was meant to uplift. The document concludes by emphasizing the broader implications of this case. It is not just about Blake Lively or the misconduct on a single film set. It's a damning indictment of a culture that enables and perpetuates abuse of power. By standing up against these forces, Lively has exposed the systemic failures that allow such behavior to persist, and has set a powerful example for others to follow. Strategies of Baldoni's team extended to influencing how the public would view the cast dynamics. When most cast members chose not to appear in public with Baldoni during the film's promotional events, it raised suspicions. Instead of addressing the real reasons behind this distance, his behavior on set, Baldoni's PR team worked to spin this as a personal choice, unrelated to any misconduct. This diversionary tactic was yet another example of their efforts to obscure the truth. The document delves into the manipulation of media narratives. Baldoni's team actively sought out survivor stories to amplify on social media, not to genuinely support them, but to deflect attention from his own actions. These stories were cherry-picked and framed in a way that bolstered Baldoni's public image, creating the illusion of solidarity while diverting focus from the harassment allegations against him. This cynical exploitation of survivors was not only unethical, but also deeply disrespectful to those who had shared their personal experiences in good faith. Despite the efforts to redirect public attention, cracks began to show in the carefully curated narrative. The document recounts instances where Baldoni's PR team struggled to maintain consistency in their messaging, with some members expressing doubts about the optics of certain strategies. For example, proposals to share highly risky or intimate content, such as birth videos, were ultimately deemed too risky. These internal conflicts revealed the precarious nature of their attempts to control the narrative. The retaliatory tactics extended beyond media manipulation to direct harm against Lively. The document highlights how Baldoni's team intentionally spread false and defamatory stories about her, portraying her as difficult to work with and undermining her credibility. These actions weren't just about protecting Baldoni's reputation, they were about punishing Lively for speaking out and discouraging others from following her example. In addition to discrediting Lively, the retaliation campaign sought to suppress any discussion of the broader workplace issues at Wayfair Studios. HR complaints were dismissed, witnesses were silenced, and the toxic environment was allowed to persist unchecked. The deliberate obstruction of accountability mechanisms created an atmosphere where misconduct could thrive, leaving cast and crew members without recourse. The January 4th meeting agreement included detailed provisions to safeguard cast and crew members going forward. These included the presence of an intimacy coordinator, restrictions on unapproved physical contact, and measures to ensure privacy during scenes involving nudity or simulated sex. While these protections were a step in the right direction, their necessity underscored the extent of the failures that had allowed such an unsafe environment to exist in the first place. The protections also included a mandate against retaliation for raising concerns, a clause that became especially relevant as Lively faced an orchestrated campaign to undermine her professionally and personally. This clause, however, did little to deter Baldoni's team from pursuing their retaliatory efforts, demonstrating the limits of contractual safeguards when power dynamics are so heavily skewed in favor of those at top. The document closes by emphasizing the broader implications of these events. This isn't just a story about one actress standing up for herself. It's a wake-up call for the industry at large. It highlights the urgent need for systemic reforms to ensure that all cast and crew members can work in environments that prioritize safety, respect, and accountability over power and profit. Blake Lively's fight isn't just her own, it's a fight for everyone who has been silenced or ignored in the face of abuse. The leadership at Wayfair Studios, particularly Justin Baldoni and Jamey Heath, is describing the document as creating a workplace environment fraught with misconduct and harassment. Baldoni, who held multiple roles as director, producer, and lead actor, wielded unchecked power over the cast and crew. This authority allowed him to blur professional boundaries repeatedly, from improvising intimate scenes without consent to disregarding basic protocols for safety and privacy. These actions weren't isolated lapses. They reflected a pattern of behavior enabled by a culture that placed power above accountability. The document further details how Baldoni's behavior during the production of It Ends With Us often veered into inappropriate and invasive territory. For example, he disregarded established industry norms for filming intimate scenes, improvising physical contact that had not been choreographed or approved beforehand. This included actions such as biting and sucking on Blake Lively's lip during multiple takes, behavior that violated not only her personal boundaries but also her professional autonomy as an actor. On another occasion, Baldoni engaged in deeply troubling conduct during a scene where no audio was being recorded. Instead of remaining in character, he leaned in close to Lively, dragged his lips across her neck, and made an unsolicited comment about how good she smelled. This act, which had no relevance to the script or character, was both invasive and inappropriate, leaving Lively feeling humiliated and objectified. The issues weren't confined to intimate scenes. Baldoni also made unauthorized changes to the script, including the addition of explicit sexual content, such as an on-camera orgasm scene for Lively's character, which she objected. Baldoni defended his decisions on being part of a female gaze approach to filmmaking. However, his actions and justifications only further demonstrated a lack of respect for Lively's boundaries and professional input. In another disturbing instance, Baldoni pressured Lively to simulate full nudity during a birthing scene, insisting that women naturally give birth naked. This demand was not included in the script, her contract, or any prior creative discussions. Despite her discomfort, Lively was coerced into partially complying, highlighting the significant power imbalance at play on set. The chaos and lack of safeguards during the filming of the birthing scene were emblematic of the broader issues on set. Non-essential crew members were allowed on set during this sensitive scene, and basic protections, such as turning off monitors or using an intimacy coordinator, were ignored. The environment was not only unprofessional, but also deeply humiliating for Lively, who had to repeatedly advocate for her own privacy and dignity. The document also outlines how Jamey Heath displayed similarly troubling behavior. In one incident, he approached Lively and her assistant to show them a video of his own wife giving birth. Without warning, the video included explicit nudity, leaving Lively stunned and uncomfortable. Heath's casual dismissal of her discomfort further demonstrated the lack of boundaries and respect prevalent on set. In perhaps one of the most disturbing revelations, Baldoni added a scene involving the underage version of Lively's character, Lily, losing her virginity. The scene, which included graphic details and simulated sexual content, was not part of the original script or book. Baldoni's decision to include this content, and his subsequent inappropriate comments about the scene, underscored a pattern of exploiting sensitive material for his own purposes, regardless of the impact on cast and crew. Beyond the professional misconduct, Baldoni and Heath frequently engaged in inappropriate conversations with Lively, including unsolicited discussions about their personal sexual experiences. These interactions not only crossed professional boundaries, but also created an environment where Lively felt unsafe and demeaned. Their attempts to normalize such behavior under the guise of camaraderie only compounded the hostile environment on set. Baldoni's conduct extended beyond the professional realm into deeply personal invasions of privacy. On one occasion, he claimed to have communicated with Lively's deceased father, an assertion that was both unsettling and unwelcome. This behavior was not only inappropriate, but indicative of a broader pattern where Baldoni used personal vulnerabilities to insert himself into private aspects of others' lives, further eroding boundaries. In addition to these personal invasions, Baldoni repeatedly objectified women on set, making unwelcome comments about their appearances. One particularly egregious incident involved Baldoni pressuring Lively to remove her coat to reveal an outfit underneath, commenting on how sexy she looked. When Lively expressed her discomfort, he dismissed her concerns sarcastically, trivializing her objections and reinforcing a hostile workplace environment. This objectification wasn't limited to comments made directly to Lively. Baldoni also made disparaging remarks about her age and appearance, claiming that her character didn't look attractive enough in certain scenes. These criticisms were not only unprofessional, but deeply undermining, further contributing to an environment where Lively's confidence and autonomy were repeatedly challenged. This document highlights another disturbing incident involving Jamey Heath entering Lively's makeup trailer unannounced while she was topless. Despite being told to wait, Heath insisted on speaking with her immediately, forcing Lively into a deeply uncomfortable situation. The blatant disregard for her privacy underscored the pervasive lack of respect and professionalism on set. Beyond these personal violations, the document outlines how both Baldoni and Heath frequently entered Lively's private trailer without her permission, including times when she was breastfeeding her infant. These intrusions were not only invasive, but also emblematic of the broader disregard for Lively's personal and professional boundaries throughout the production. Adding to the pattern of inappropriate behavior, Baldoni secretly contacted Lively's fitness trainer to inquire about her weight, allegedly under the guise of concerns about a scene requiring him to lift her, despite no such scene existing. This covert attempt to control her appearance was both humiliating and a gross overreach, reflecting an obsession with policing her body. These issues were compounded by Wafer Studios' failure to provide basic workplace accommodations. Lively, who was breastfeeding at the time, was not given adequate breaks to pump milk, resulting in physical pain and health complications. This neglect further highlighted the studio's indifference to the well being of its cast and crew. When Lively contracted strep throat, Baldoni offered to connect her with a so called health expert who turned out to be a weight loss specialist. This deceitful gesture was yet another example of how Baldoni attempted to shame and control Lively under the guise of concern, further eroding trust and professionalism on set. The document also describes Wafer's mishandling of a COVID-19 outbreak on set. Lively was not informed of her exposure to the virus, which resulted in both her and her infant contracting COVID. This failure to prioritize safety underscored the lack of basic protections for cast and crew, further contributing to the toxic environment. Despite multiple grievances raised by Lively and others, Wafer Studios consistently failed to investigate or address complaints of harassment and misconduct. This systemic failure allowed Baldoni and Heath's behavior to continue unchecked, creating an environment where accountability was non-existent, and cast and crew members were left vulnerable. Lively attempted to report these incidents to Sony, the film's distributor, but was told that such concerns had to be addressed by Wafer Studios, the production company responsible for managing the set. However, Wafer provided no clear process for filing HR complaints, and any attempts to raise concerns were met with indifference or outright dismissal, further isolating Lively in her efforts to seek accountability. The document notes that on the very first day of filming, Jamey Heath joked about receiving an HR complaint after attempting to hug a staff member, illustrating how issues of harassment were trivialized from the outset. This casual attitude toward serious workplace concerns set the tone for the production, where complaints were brushed aside and normalized. Another cast member raised concerns about Baldoni's inappropriate comments about her appearance. Although Baldoni initially acknowledged the complaint and agreed to adjust his behavior, the document reveals that he later expressed paranoia about this cast member's friendship with Lively, suggesting that they were conspiring against him. This response demonstrates how complaints were met with deflection and suspicion rather than meaningful action. Despite repeated attempts to address these issues, Lively's concerns went unresolved. Wafer Studios, under the leadership of Baldoni and Heath, failed to investigate allegations or take steps to ensure a safe working environment. This failure of accountability left Lively and other cast and crew members vulnerable to ongoing harassment and misconduct. The breakdown in professional conduct extended to the studio's disregard for workplace safety during the COVID-19 pandemic. After learning she and her infant had contracted COVID due to an outbreak on set, Lively discovered that Wafer had deliberately withheld information about her exposure. This recklessness underscored the production's prioritization of schedules and costs over the well-being of its employees. The contractual rider negotiated before the resumption of filming was intended to address these systemic issues. It included provisions for the presence of an intimacy coordinator, strict guidelines for scenes involving nudity or simulated sex, and protections against retaliation for raising concerns. While these measures were essential, their necessity highlighted how far the production had fallen short of industry standards prior to the intervention. The January 4th meeting was a critical moment in the negotiation process, bringing together key figures, including Baldoni, Heath, Lively, and her representative, Ryan Reynolds. During the meeting, Lively outlined specific examples of the behavior that had led to the creation of the contractual rider. Notably, neither Baldoni nor Heath denied the veracity of her claims, effectively confirming the need for these protective measures. While the contractual rider allowed filming to resume, it did not address the underlying culture of harassment and disregard for accountability that had permeated the production. The measures were reactive, implemented only after months of misconduct and resistance, underscoring the systemic failures that had necessitated such drastic intervention. As the film entered its promotional phase, Lively and her fellow cast members adhered to the agreed upon marketing plan, which emphasized themes of hope and resilience, rather than focusing on darker aspects of the storyline. However, Baldoni deviated from this strategy, using the promotional period to redirect attention to his own narrative and away from the allegations of misconduct on set. Baldoni's pivot to survivor content during the promotional phase was calculated mode to shift public perception. By aligning himself with experiences of survivors, he attempted to frame himself as an advocate while simultaneously distancing himself from the allegations against him. This strategy was not only self-serving but also exploitative, co-opting the stories of survivors to protect his image. Despite the marketing plan's emphasis on optimism and resilience, Baldoni's team worked behind the scenes to influence public perception in his favor. They employ tactics such as amplifying survivor stories and selectively sharing positive content about Baldoni. This was not an organic shift, but a calculated campaign to rehabilitate his image while obscuring the truth about the workplace environment during production. The document reveals that Baldoni and his team orchestrated a targeted campaign of retaliation against Blake Lively. Through social media manipulation, false narratives, and covert PR strategies, they aimed to discredit her and diminish the impact of her complaints. This was not merely damage control, it was a deliberate effort to silence and punish her for speaking out. One particularly troubling aspect of the campaign was the use of astroturfing, a deceptive practice where orchestrated opinions are presented as grassroots movements. Baldoni's team created fake accounts and seeded misleading content to shift the public narrative. By blurring the line between genuine support and manufactured propaganda, they sought to undermine Lively's credibility while bolstering Baldoni's public persona. But retaliation extended beyond online manipulation. Baldoni's team also worked to shut down media stories that could have exposed the toxic environment on set. By leveraging their influence, they suppressed HR complaints and silenced witnesses, ensuring that the full scope of misconduct remained hidden from public view. By amplifying survivor narratives that aligned with his rebranding efforts, they created a smokescreen that obscured the real issues. This exploitation of vulnerable individuals was both unethical and deeply disrespectful, turning personal stories into tools for image management. Even within Baldoni's own team, there were moments of internal conflict about the ethics of their actions. Discussions about using highly personal content, such as birth videos, as part of the promotional strategy, were ultimately rejected for fear of backlash. However, the willingness to consider such invasive tactics highlights the lengths to which they were prepared to go to protect Baldoni's reputation. Despite the protections outlined in the contractual rider, Lively continued to face challenges during the promotional phase of the film. Baldoni's deviation from the agreed marketing strategy created additional strain, as Lively and others were forced to navigate a public narrative that had been manipulated to serve his interests. This further demonstrated the imbalance of power and the lack of accountability within the production. The document concludes by emphasizing the broader implications of these events. This was not just a case of individual misconduct, but a reflection of systemic issues within the industry. The failure to address harassment, enforce accountability, and prioritize the well-being of cast and crew members created an environment where such behavior could thrive unchecked. Blake Lively's fight for accountability goes beyond her own experiences. By exposing the toxic culture on set and the lengths to which Baldoni and his team went to retaliate against her, she has shed light on the systemic failures that enable abuse of power. Her actions have set a precedent for challenging these dynamics and advocating for a safer, more respectful work environment. The final takeaway from the document is clear. The events surrounding It Ends With Us are a stark reminder of the importance of transparency, accountability, and systemic change. Lively's courage in standing up to these forces is a powerful call to action for the industry to prioritize the safety and dignity of all its members, regardless of their role or position. The Writers Guild of America strike in May 2023 brought production on It Ends With Us to a halt. While the strike offered an opportunity to pause and address on set issues, it also highlighted how the production's unresolved grievances had created an untenable work environment. The timing of the strike coincided with escalating concerns from Blake Lively about the toxic workplace culture perpetuated by Justin Baldoni and Jamey Heath. During the WGA strike, which was followed by a strike by SAG-AFTRA, Lively saw an opportunity to push for systemic changes. She and her legal team drafted a document titled Protections for Return to Production, outlining specific requirements for ensuring a safe and professional work environment moving forward. These proposals were aimed not only at addressing past grievances, but also at preventing further misconduct during the remainder of the production. The Protections from Return to Production document detailed numerous safeguards, including the mandatory presence of an intimacy coordinator, restrictions on the improvisation of intimate scenes, and provisions to ensure that all sensitive content adhered to pre-approved guidelines. The measures were designed to address both the immediate issues on set and the systemic failures that had allowed these problems to persist. Wayfair Studios responded to the proposed protections with cautious acknowledgement. While the studio agreed in principle to many of the requests, their initial response lacked urgency and commitment. They framed the demands as reasonable, but offered little indication of how these measures would be implemented or enforced, raising doubts about their willingness to create meaningful change. The contractual rider was finalized in January of 2024, incorporating many of the provisions outlined in the Protections for Return to Production. These included measures to ensure the safety of cast and crew, the involvement of Lively in approving key personnel, and the establishment of strict guidelines for handling intimate and sensitive scenes. While this represented progress, the process of reaching this agreement underscored the resistance Lively faced in advocating for a safer workplace. Key figures from Wayfair Studios, including Justin Baldoni and Jamey Heath, agreed to the terms of the contractual rider during the January 4th meeting. The agreement was a significant victory for Lively, but it also highlighted the extent to which these measures were reactive rather than proactive. The fact that such basic protections had to be negotiated at all reflected poorly on the studio's initial approach to workplace safety and accountability. Following the January 4th meeting, production resumed under the new guidelines, but the underlying issues of power dynamics and accountability remained unaddressed. While the contractual rider provided a framework for moving forward, it did little to reserve the long-term consequences of the hostile work environment that had defined the earlier stages of production. As filming resumed, the contractual rider ensured greater oversight and accountability, but tensions remained high. Lively's advocacy for herself and her colleagues had led to significant changes, but it also had made her a target for retaliation. The systemic issues within the production, from inadequate HR policies to unchecked power, continued to cast a shadow over the project. The contractual rider required an all-hands meeting to confirm the implementation of the agreed protections. This meeting was intended to address safety concerns and create a roadmap for the remainder of the production. The need for such detailed guidelines reflected a culture that had long prioritized power and profit over the safety and dignity of its employees. For Lively, the fight to implement these protections was both a personal and professional battle against a deeply entrenched system. Despite the implementation of the contractual rider, tensions on set persisted as the production resumed. The document reveals that while guidelines provided some safeguards, the underlying issues of power imbalance and disregard for accountability had not been fully addressed. These unresolved dynamics made the work environment challenging, even with the new protections in place. Blake Lively's persistence in advocating for these protections came at a personal and professional cost. As the document details, she faced resistance, hostility, and retaliation from key figures within the production. Her willingness to confront these systemic issues not only highlighted the failures of Wayfair Studios, but also underscored the risks involved in standing up against such entrenched power dynamics. The document notes that while the contractual writer improved certain aspects of the production environment, it could not undo the harm that had already been done. The months of harassment, misconduct, and dismissal of complaints had left a lasting impact on both Lively and other members of the cast and crew. These experiences served as a stark reminder of the need for systemic reforms within the industry. One of the key provisions of the contractual writer was the appointment of an intimacy coordinator to oversee all scenes involving physical intimacy. This was a critical step in ensuring that boundaries were respected and that actors felt safe during the production. However, the document reveals that even this measure was met with resistance, highlighting the deeply ingrained culture of disregard for industry norms at Wayfair Studios. The document also emphasizes the importance of the protections against retaliation included in the contractual rider. The provisions were meant to safeguard cast and crew members who spoke out about misconduct or unsafe conditions. However, Lively's experiences during and after the production demonstrated how difficult it is to enforce such protections when power dynamics remained heavily skewed. As the film entered its promotional phase, the retaliation against Lively continued in more subtle forms. The document outlines how marketing strategies were manipulated to marginalize her role while elevating Justin Baldoni's public persona. This included framing the narrative around Baldoni's vision for the film, further sidelining Lively's contributions and undermining her advocacy efforts. The promotional campaign also saw Baldoni and his team leveraging survivor narratives to distract from the allegations against him. This exploitation of deeply personal stories was not only unethical, but also a calculated attempt to shield himself from accountability. By co-opting these narratives, Baldoni shifted attention away from the systemic issues on set, deflecting scrutiny from his own actions. While the contractual protections ensured a degree of safety during filming, the marketing phase revealed a new form of hostility. The document details how fake accounts were created to spread positive messages about Baldoni and disparage Lively. These tactics blurred the lines between genuine support and orchestrated propaganda. Additionally, the document reveals that Baldoni's PR team worked to suppress negative stories in the media. This involved contacting journalists and outlets to dissuade them from covering allegations of misconduct or the workplace culture issues at Wayfair Studios. Despite the success of some of these efforts, cracks began to appear in the carefully constructed narrative. Public sentiment around the film and its production started to shift as more details about the workplace environment came to light. The document suggests that while Baldoni's tactics may have been effective in the short term, they ultimately could not erase the deeper issues surrounding the production. Ultimately, Lively's experience served as both a cautionary tale and a call to action. Her efforts to hold Wayfair Studios and its leadership accountable demonstrate the importance of standing up to entrenched systems of power. At the same time, they highlight the significant personal and professional risks involved in challenging these dynamics, particularly for women in the industry. This failure to address systemic issues not only enabled the harmful behaviors to persist, but also contributed to the broader culture of silence and complicity. As the promotional period unfolded, it became evident that the retaliation against Blake Lively extended beyond the production itself. Her efforts to demand accountability and advocate for a safer workplace were reframed by Baldoni's team as acts of defiance or disruption. This narrative, amplified through controlled media and social channels, sought to paint Lively as the problem rather than the victim of an unsafe work environment. The social manipulation campaign, orchestrated by Baldoni's team, included targeted attacks on Lively's character and professionalism. By spreading false narratives and amplifying misleading accounts, they aimed to undermine her credibility and isolate her from the allies within the industry. These actions were not just retaliatory, but calculated efforts to ensure that Lively's concerns would be dismissed or forgotten. One of the most insidious aspects of the retaliation was its focus on public perception. Baldoni's team worked to create an image of him as a champion of survivors and a progressive voice in Hollywood, all while actively silencing and marginalizing Lively's voice. This dual strategy of self promotion and suppression underscores the depth of the manipulation involved in the campaign. Despite the challenges, Blake Lively's advocacy had a lasting impact on the conversation around workplace safety and accountability in Hollywood. By speaking out about her experiences, she brought attention to the systemic issues that allow misconduct and harassment to thrive. Her bravery in standing up to these powerful forces serves as an example for others facing similar struggles. The document concludes with a call to action for the industry as a whole. It emphasizes the need for stronger protections, clearer accountability mechanisms, and a culture that prioritizes safety and respect over profit and power. Without changes, the issues faced during the production of It Ends With Us are likely to continue, leaving countless others vulnerable to similar abuses, regardless of their position or influence. Blake Lively's efforts, while significant, highlight the need for systemic reform to ensure that all workers in Hollywood are protected and respected, regardless of their position or